The polished toe of a $2,000 Oxford shoe slammed into Danielle's side before the insult even left William's mouth. She skidded across the white marble of the showroom floor, her royal blue dress tearing as she collided with a display of gold Christmas ornaments. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the high-end car shop, followed by a deafening, cold silence. Danielle looked up from the floor, her natural afro slightly disheveled, but her eyes wide with a shock that wasn't quite fear. Standing over her was William Richards, the man who had drained her bank accounts, mocked her heritage, and left her for dead 3 years ago. Stay on the floor where you belong, Danielle. This is a place for people with status, not trash like you. William sneered, adjusting his tailored suit. He had no idea who she was anymore. He had no idea that the poor ex-wife who once scavenged for rent money was gone, replaced by a woman who walked through fire to find her worth. William had no idea about the custom-carved jade ring tucked inside her clutch, the armored penthouse she had woken up in that morning, or the influence she now wielded. And he definitely had no idea about the man she was currently supposed to be meeting for lunch, the man whose elite security team was already closing off the showroom's glass exits. Baek Jia, her husband, the most feared syndicate leader in the country. Before we dive deeper into this story of love, revenge, and redemption, I want to wish you all a blessed and happy New Year celebration. May your holidays be filled with love, joy, and beautiful moments with those who matter most. Now, do me a favor by subscribing to the channel now and turn on notifications. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's get into this dramatic journey. As Danielle's hand reached into her bag to silence the vibrating phone, the caller ID simply reading "My King," she saw the first flicker of confusion on William's face. He thought he was clearing out a nuisance. He didn't realize that in exactly 6 minutes, when Jia's black SUV screeched onto the curb, William's entire world was going to be systematically erased. He still thought he was the most powerful man in the room. That was his final mistake. The golden light of a soul sunrise spilled across the silk sheets of the master suite, but Danielle was already awake, standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the walk-in closet. Today marked their second wedding anniversary, a day that felt like a miracle every time she checked the calendar. On the velvet ottoman behind her lay a fitted royal blue dress, its fabric shimmering like the deep ocean. It was a gift from Jia, hand-delivered by his personal tailor with a note that simply read, "For the woman who brought color back to my world." As Danielle stepped into the dress, the cool silk glided over her skin, hugging her curves in a way that felt like an embrace. She reached up to fluff her voluminous natural afro, ensuring every coil was perfectly in place. She looked elegant, expensive, and undeniably powerful. Yet, as she reached for her jewelry, her fingers trembled just slightly. The royal blue was a bold choice, a sharp contrast to the muted tone she used to wear when she was trying to be invisible, trying to be less so that William wouldn't notice her. Despite the luxury that now defined her life, the sprawling penthouse, the limitless black cards, and the protection of the most feared man in the city, the old Danielle still lived in the shadows of her mind. That Danielle still remembered the sound of William's laughter when he told her she was unmarketable and gutter-born. She remembered the feeling of being invisible in rooms filled with people who looked like the one she was about to encounter today at the showroom. She was going there to surprise Jia, to pick out a car together as an anniversary tradition, but the thought of high-end sales associates looking through her still made her stomach do a nervous flip. "You're overthinking again," a deep, resonant voice rumbled from the doorway. Danielle turned to see Jia leaning against the frame. He was already dressed in a charcoal black suit, his shirt slightly open at the collar to reveal the dark ink of a dragon's tail coiling up his neck. His eyes, usually cold enough to freeze his enemies in their tracks, softened instantly when they landed on her. He walked toward her, his presence commanding yet gentle, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "I just wanted A to be perfect," she whispered, stepping toward him. "Your world, it's still so loud sometimes, Jia. I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want people to look at me and see someone who doesn't belong." Jia reached out, his tattooed hand cupping her cheek with a tenderness that few would believe he was capable of. He tilted her head up until her eyes met his. You are the only thing in my world that makes sense, Danielle. You don't visit my world, you own it. If anyone looks at you with anything less than absolute respect, they aren't looking at my wife. They're looking at their own funeral. He leaned down, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead before sliding a custom-carved jade ring onto her finger. It was heavy, a physical reminder of the status she now held. Danielle took a deep breath, the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and steel, grounding her. She felt beautiful, cherished, and for the first time in years, truly safe. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The woman in the blue dress was a queen. She had no way of knowing that within hours, the man who had tried to break her would be standing in her path, or that the royal blue dress she loved so much was about to be dragged across the showroom floor. She didn't know that the nervous girl inside her was about to be forced to face her greatest demon, or that the husband standing beside her would soon prove exactly how dangerous he could be for her sake. Right now, there was only the sun, the silk, and the promise of a perfect day. She stepped out of the room, ready to face the world, unaware that the world was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The scent of expensive leather and floor wax filled the air as Danielle pushed through the heavy glass doors of the showroom. This was a temple of steel and status, where exotic cars, glossy Ferraris and custom Lamborghinis sat like predatory cats under the bright white spotlights. Chrome surfaces reflected the festive gold decorations hanging from the ceiling, and the atmosphere hummed with the quiet, understated sound of extreme wealth. Danielle adjusted the strap of her clutch, feeling the weight of the jade ring against her palm. She was only there to wait for Jia's motorcade to arrive for their anniversary lunch date, but as she stepped further into the hall, the air in her lungs suddenly turned to ice. Across the room, standing beside a sleek, silver McLaren, was a man she hadn't seen in 3 years. William Richards looked exactly as he did the day he drained her bank accounts and discarded her, impeccably groomed, wearing a suit that cost a small fortune, and radiating an aura of suffocating self-importance. He was mid-sentence, laughing at a joke made by a wealthy-looking couple, his hands gesturing expansively as he pitched the vehicle's specs. He was a high-level executive here now, the king of his own small, shallow hill. Danielle tried to turn away, to find a quiet corner or a seat in the lounge, but it was too late. William's eyes swept the room and locked onto her. For a split second, a flash of recognition and genuine shock crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of cold, sneering disgust. He whispered something to his clients, a dismissive flick of his hand, and began walking toward her with the stride of a man who believed he owned the very ground he walked on. "I thought I smelled something cheap," Williams said, his voice a low, venomous hiss that didn't reach the ears of his guests. He stopped inches from her, his shadow looming over her royal blue dress. "How did you even get past the front desk, Danielle? This isn't a bus station, and we don't have any spare change to give you today." Danielle stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she refused to let her hands shake. "I'm here to meet my husband, William. I didn't come here for you." "To meet your husband? What? Did the janitor get a promotion?" He let out a sharp, mocking bark of a laugh, his eyes raking over her dress with narrowed intensity. He clearly assumed the designer label was a knockoff, a desperate attempt to look like she belonged in a world he thought she was unworthy of. "You're a stain on this showroom, Danielle. You're ruining the atmosphere for my actual clients, people who can actually afford to breathe this air. Look at you, still trying to play dress up in colors that don't belong on you. I told you years ago you were nothing, and looking at you now, nothing has changed." He stepped closer, his physical presence designed to make her feel small, a tactic he had perfected over years of emotional warfare. He looked around at the luxury surrounding them, then back at her with a look of pure contempt. "Get out before I have security drag you out and throw you into the street where I found you. I have $1 million commission on the line, and I won't let a ghost from the gutter blow it for me. You're an eyesore, Danielle. Leave. Now." He didn't see the flicker of fire in her eyes, nor did he notice the black SUVs pulling up silently behind the tinted glass of the showroom entrance. He only saw a woman he thought he had broken, completely unaware that he was currently standing in the path of a storm he couldn't possibly survive. The silence that followed William's demand was heavy, suffocating under the bright, artificial glow of the showroom's recessed lighting. Danielle didn't move, her feet planted firmly on the reflective marble, though every instinct she possessed screamed for her to run back to the safety of her penthouse. William's face contorted, his upper lip curling as he leaned into her personal space, the scent of his expensive, sterile cologne clashing with the warmth of her own presence. "Did you hear me? Or has that nest on your head finally muffled your hearing?" He spat, gesturing toward her voluminous natural afro with a flick of his wrist. "I see you're still wearing that hair. I told you years ago it looked unrefined. You look like a caricature of a struggle, Danielle. You're standing here in a room full of precision engineering and peak aesthetics, and you look like a reminder of everything this world tries to forget." His words were sharp, jagged glass meant to cut through the armor she had spent 3 years building. He stepped back, circling her like a predator inspecting a wounded animal, his eyes lingering on the tear in her sleeve where his grip had been too tight moments before. "Look at this dress," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Royal blue? It's loud. It's desperate. It's the color of someone who just discovered what a credit card is. You can wrap a gutter cat in silk, but it's still a cat that's used to eating scraps." Danielle felt the familiar heat of shame prickling at her neck, the ghost of her past self whispering that he was right. But then she felt the weight of the jade ring on her finger, the symbol of a man who looked at her and saw a masterpiece, not a project. She took a steadying breath. "My hair is my crown, William. And this dress was a gift from a man who actually knows the value of the things he possesses. You never did." The rejection hit William harder than any physical blow could have. His ego, inflated by his high-status job and his wealthy clientele, bruised instantly. To be spoken back to by the woman he had crushed under his heel was an insult he couldn't tolerate. He saw his wealthy clients glancing over, their brows furrowed in curiosity, and the fear of losing his perfect professional image turned his simmering anger into a flash of white-hot rage. "You think you're special because you found some bottom-tier thug to buy you a few trinkets?" William hissed, his voice cracking with the strain of keeping his volume down. "You are nothing but a charity case. You were a mistake I made when I was young and foolish, and I won't let you ruin my life twice." He didn't see the black-suited men stepping out of the SUVs outside, their movements synchronized and lethal. He didn't see the way the showroom's manager suddenly went pale, dropping his clipboard as he recognized the man leading the group. William only saw the woman who dared to stand tall in his presence. "I said, get out." The escalation was instantaneous. William's hand shot out, grabbing Danielle's shoulder and spinning her around toward the exit. When she tried to pull away, his frustration boiled over. In an act of pure, entitled cruelty, he pulled back his foot and delivered a sharp, calculated kick to her side. The force of the blow sent Danielle stumbling. Her heels lost their grip on the polished marble, and she went down hard. She collided with a designer display stand, sending gold Christmas ornaments scattering and shattering across the floor like tiny, festive explosions. As she lay there, the cold stone pressing against her skin and the sting of the impact radiating through her ribs, Danielle didn't cry. She braced herself against the floor, her eyes narrowing as she looked past William toward the glass doors. The shadow of the dragon had arrived. William stood over her, his chest heaving, a triumphant, ugly smile playing on his lips, completely unaware that he had just invited a monster into his sanctuary. The air in the showroom didn't just grow cold. It turned absolute zero, a predatory stillness that seemed to freeze the very light reflecting off the chrome of the exotic cars. William was still standing over Danielle, his face flushed with the ugly adrenaline of his own cruelty, a jagged laugh starting to form in his throat. But the sound died before it could leave his lips. The heavy glass doors of the showroom didn't just open. They were held wide with a terrifying, synchronized precision by two men whose presence felt like a physical weight against the chest. For men moved into the space. They didn't run, and they didn't shout. They moved with the rhythmic, haunting certainty of a funeral procession. They were draped in charcoal black suits that seemed to swallow the glare of the overhead spotlights, their physiques broad and athletic, vibrating with a disciplined, lethal energy. Two of them split off immediately, their polished shoes clicking with haunting rhythm against the marble as they moved toward the rear exits, effectively sealing the room. They didn't look at the cars, and they didn't look at the terrified socialites clutching their champagne flutes. Their eyes were fixed forward, unblinking and professional. In the center of the formation stood the man with the dragon coiling up his neck. His tattoos, dark and intricate, peeked out from his collar and cuffs like a warning written in ink. He didn't look like a businessman, and he didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like the personification of a consequence. The showroom manager, a man who usually moved with the pride of a king, was now trembling so violently his clipboard clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. William's arrogance, though battered by the sudden shift in atmosphere, hadn't yet been extinguished. He straightened his tie, trying to regain his posture as the men approached. "Look, I don't know who you are, but we're in the middle of a private showing," William blustered, his voice an octave higher than it had been seconds ago. "This woman was causing a disturbance, and I was just." He stopped because the man in the front, the one with the cold, unreadable East Asian features, hadn't even looked at him. The man's eyes were locked on the floor, on the shattered gold ornaments, on the torn hem of a royal blue dress, and on the woman currently bracing herself against the cold marble. The enforcers formed a semicircle around Danielle, creating a wall of impenetrable shadow between her and the rest of the world. They stood like obsidian statues, their hands folded in front of them, their silence more deafening than any threat. The wealthy clients who had been watching with detached amusement moments ago were now backing away, sensing that the air in the room had become combustible. William felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He looked at the exits, but the men stationed there were as immovable as mountains. He looked back at Danielle, who was slowly pushing herself up from the floor, her expression shifting from disorientation to a terrifying, quiet clarity. She wasn't looking at William anymore. She was looking at the entrance, her eyes reflecting the arrival of the storm. The shadow of the dragon had fallen over the showroom, and for William Richards, the sun had just set for the last time. The heavy glass doors hissed shut, sealing the showroom like a tomb. Through the parted ranks of the enforcers, a final figure emerged from the winter haze outside. Baek Jia didn't enter the room so much as he reclaimed it. He moved with a predatory grace, his footsteps silent on the marble that had just echoed with the violence of Danielle's fall. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked like armor, the top buttons of his white shirt undone to reveal the dark, intricate ink of a dragon's tail coiling upward toward his jawline. The contrast was immediate and deafening. William was a man of loud, frantic energy. His face was still flushed a blotchy red, his chest heaving with the remnants of his pathetic outburst, and his voice, when he finally found it, was a shrill defensive bark. Jia, conversely, was the personification of a deep-sea trench, cold, silent, and exerting a pressure that made it difficult for anyone else in the room to breathe. "I don't know who you think you are," William blustered, stepping forward with a finger pointed aggressively, though his hand shook visibly. "But I am the senior executive here, and I've already called security. This woman is a trespasser, a lowlife, and I had every right to." Jia didn't interrupt him with words. He simply stopped walking. His gaze, dark and as unreadable as obsidian, shifted from William to the woman on the floor. In an instant, the underground king of Seoul vanished, replaced by a man seeing his entire world bruised and broken among shattered ornaments. Jia crossed the remaining distance in 2 long strides. He ignored William entirely, as one would ignore a fly before a storm. He sank to one knee beside Danielle, his movements fluid and soft. With a tenderness that seemed impossible for a man of his reputation, he reached out, his tattooed fingers gently brushing a stray curl away from her face. "Danielle," he murmured. His voice wasn't loud, but in the vacuum of the showroom, it carried the weight of a death sentence. It was a deadly calm, a low vibration that made the crystal chandeliers above them hum in sympathy. "You are bleeding." "I'm okay, Jia," Danielle whispered, her voice trembling but her eyes fixed on his. She took his hand, her fingers curling around his for strength. Jia didn't look okay. He looked at the torn fabric of her royal blue dress, then at the red welt beginning to bloom on her side where William's shoe had connected. He stood up slowly, the transition from husband to executioner happening in the span of a single breath. He turned to face William. He didn't scream. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stood there, his hands resting casually in his pockets, his posture relaxed. It was the relaxation of a lion that had already decided where to bite. William took a half step back, the realization finally beginning to penetrate his thick skull. The security he had been waiting for was already here. They were the men in the black suits, and they were bowing their heads in unison to the man standing in front of him. "You called her trash," Jia said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that hung in the air like a noose. "You put your hands, your filth, on the wife of Baek Jia." The silence that followed was absolute. William's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The loud, entitled executive who had been so brave against a woman on the floor was suddenly very small. Jia's presence didn't just fill the room, it suffocated it. The air didn't just feel cold anymore. It felt like the moment before a strike, the terrifying, breathless second before the sky falls. William had been screaming at a ghost, unaware that the ghost was married to a god of retribution. And now, the god was looking for an offering. Jia's hand remained steady as he helped Danielle rise from the floor, but the air around him vibrated with a lethal frequency. He didn't pull her up roughly. He supported her weight with a reverence that spoke of her absolute value. As she stood, the torn fabric of her royal blue dress shifted, revealing the deep, angry purple of the bruise blooming across her ribs. The sight of it caused Jiao's jaw to set so tightly that a muscle jumped in his cheek, the only crack in his otherwise iron facade. He reached out, his thumb tracing the edge of the jade ring on her finger before he lifted her hand for the entire showroom to see. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a seal, a sigil of the Baek family that carried more weight in this city than any government ID. "You looked at this woman and saw a victim," Jia said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, terrifying whisper that seemed to echo off the glass walls. He finally turned his gaze to William, who was now hyperventilating, his back pressed against the cold metal of the McLaren he had been so proud of minutes ago. "You saw someone you thought was unprotected. Someone you thought you could discard twice." Jia stepped forward, and the circle of enforcers tightened, their shadows stretching across the marble like ink stains. "This is not the woman you knew," Jia continued, his eyes burning with a cold, dark fire. "This is Danielle Monroe Baek. She is the matriarch of the Baek family. My wife. My equal. The woman who holds the keys to everything I own." A collective gasp rippled through the few onlookers brave enough to remain. The showroom manager stumbled back, his face draining of all color until he was as white as the walls. To disrespect a member of the Baek family was a mistake. To physically assault the wife of the dragon was a death warrant. William's knees buckled. The poor ex-wife he had spent years belittling was now the most powerful woman in the room, backed by an army that operated in the shadows of the law. He looked at Danielle, searching for the broken girl who used to beg for his affection, but all he found was a queen whose eyes held no mercy, only the reflected strength of the man standing beside her. "The ring she wears carries the blood and the history of my lineage," Jia stated, his hand resting on the small of Danielle's back, staking his claim. "Every person in this room who watched him strike her and did nothing has already failed. But you, William," Jia leaned in, his face inches from William's terrified mask. "You are going to learn exactly what happens when you try to break something that belongs to me." Danielle stood tall, her hand resting over the bruise on her side. The pain was still there, but the shame was gone. She watched as William's world, the status he had built on the backs of the women he'd hurt, began to crumble. He wasn't just looking at his ex-wife anymore. He was looking at the woman who had become his judge, jury, and executioner. The weight of the ring was finally being felt, and it was crushing him. Jia didn't move a muscle, yet the air in the showroom felt as though it were being sucked into a vacuum. At a slight tilt of his head, the enforcer to his right, a man with a jagged scar running beneath his jaw, stepped forward. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a sleek, silver tablet. With a clinical precision that felt like a surgical strike, the man tapped the screen, and the high-definition monitors mounted around the showroom, usually reserved for loops of exotic cars racing through the Alps, flickered and changed. The audit of sins had begun. William's breath hitched as his own face appeared on the screens, followed by a rapid-fire cascade of bank statements, wire transfers, and forged signatures from 3 years ago. The room watched in a haunting silence as the digital paper trail exposed the truth. William Richards hadn't just left Danielle, he had systematically bled her dry. The screens showed the final $17 balance in her account, the eviction notice he had facilitated, and the offshore account where he had hidden the life savings he stole from her to fund his first executive suit. "You built your new life on the bones of her sacrifice," Jia said, his voice a low, melodic vibration of pure menace. He didn't look at the screens. He kept his eyes on William's crumbling expression. "You thought the past was buried because you deleted the emails. But my men don't just find emails, William. They find the truth." Jia took a slow step toward him, the clicking of his shoes sounding like the ticking of a countdown clock. "While you were kicking my wife for ruining the atmosphere of this showroom, my team was busy. As of 3 minutes ago, the board of directors for this dealership received a full dossier of your embezzlement and the harassment lawsuits you paid to settle at your last firm." William's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. Then his watch. Then the tablet on the sales desk nearby. "That will be your termination notice," Jia continued, his tone conversational, as if he were discussing the weather, followed by a freeze on your assets. "You see, the bank you use. I own the majority share of their holding company. By the time you walk out those doors, if I let you walk out, you won't have enough credit to buy a cup of coffee, let alone a McLaren." The wealthy couple William had been courting earlier backed away, as if he were radioactive. The socialites whispered behind their hands, their eyes filled with the same contempt William had directed at Danielle moments ago. The hunter had become the prey, stripped of his camouflage and exposed for the parasite he was. "You stole $40,000 from her back then," Jia said, pausing just inches from William's face. "With interest, inflation, and the pain and suffering tax I apply to those who touch what is mine. You owe the Beck family everything you have. Your car, your apartment, your reputation. Consider it a down payment on the mercy I might show you." William's knees finally gave out. He slid down the side of the silver car, his hands trembling as he stared at the screens that documented his moral bankruptcy. He looked at Danielle, his mouth opening to beg, but the words died in his throat. She wasn't the broken girl he could manipulate anymore. She stood beside Jia, her posture as straight as a blade, watching the systematic destruction of his life with a calm, resolute silence. Jia reached out and plucked the high-end watch from William's wrist, tossing it carelessly to the floor where it shattered next to the gold Christmas ornaments. "The audit is complete," Jia whispered, "and you are insolvent." The polished marble of the showroom floor, which William had once paced with the arrogance of a conqueror, now felt like an altar of his own sacrifice. He was on his knees, his hands pressed against the cold stone, mere inches from where Danielle had skidded after his kick. The irony was a physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. Around him, the circle of black-suited enforcers remained as motionless as statues, their silence more terrifying than any shouting could ever be. Jia stood over him, his shadow swallowing William whole. The underground king didn't need to use force. His mere presence demanded gravity. He looked down at William with a clinical detachment, as if observing a broken piece of machinery that was no longer worth the cost of repair. "Please," William whimpered, his voice cracking, the polished executive facade completely shattered. He looked at Jia's handmade Italian shoes, afraid to raise his eyes. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know who she was. I'll pay it back. I'll give her everything. Just, please, tell your men to stop. My life, my career." "Your life ended the moment your shoe touched her dress," Jia replied, his voice a low, melodic threat. "You aren't begging for mercy because you're sorry. You're begging because you're afraid. You're begging because for the first time in your pathetic existence, you've encountered a power that doesn't care about your titles or your lies." Jia stepped aside, clearing the path between the predator and the prey. He looked at Danielle, a silent invitation in his eyes. He wasn't going to finish this for her. He was giving her the floor she had been kicked across. Danielle stepped forward. Her ribs throbbed with every breath, a sharp reminder of the violence she had just endured, but her gait was steady. She stopped in front of William, looking down at the man who had once been the architect of her nightmares. Up close, he looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like the coward he had always been. William reached out, his fingers trembling as he tried to grab the hem of her royal blue dress, the same dress he had called as stained minutes ago. Danielle, please. We were family once. You were always the kind one. Talk to him. Tell him I'm sorry. You know I didn't mean it. Danielle didn't flinch. She looked at his reaching hand and then into his tear-streaked face. For 3 years, she had carried the weight of his voice in her head, telling her she was nothing, that she was gutter-born, that she was unlovable. But as she looked at him now, that voice finally went silent. You're right about one thing, William, Danielle said, her voice clear and resonant, filling every corner of the silent showroom. I was the kind one. I was the one who believed in you when you had nothing, and I was the one who loved you until it nearly killed me. But kindness is not a weakness, and my silence was never a permission slip for your cruelty. She leaned down slightly, her shadow falling over him. You didn't kick a poor woman today, William. You kicked a survivor. You kicked the woman who built the man standing behind me. You see, Gia didn't find me in the gutter. He found me in the fire, and he recognized the gold you were too blind to see. William sobbed, a pathetic, wet sound that echoed off the glass walls. I'll do anything. I'll leave the country. You'll do exactly what you told me to do 3 years ago, Danielle interrupted, her eyes as hard as the jade on her finger. You'll stay down where you belong. You spent years trying to make me feel small so you could feel tall. Now look at us. I'm standing, and you're exactly where you always wanted me to be. She turned her back on him, the silk of her dress swishing against the marble. The final verbal blow didn't just break William's spirit, it erased his hold over her. She walked back to Gia's side, her head held high, the natural crown of her hair catching the light. She had found her voice on the very floor where he had tried to silence her, and in doing so, she had finally set herself free. William remained on the floor, a broken man in a broken world, surrounded by the gold shards of a Christmas he would never get to celebrate. Gia reached out, his hand sliding firmly around Danielle's waist as he pulled her into the protective warmth of his side. He didn't spare a final glance at the broken man sobbing on the floor. William Richards was already a ghost, a name being erased from every database and ledger in the city. The enforcers stepped back in a synchronized wave, clearing a path that led directly to the center of the showroom, where a custom-built, midnight black Bugatti sat beneath a halo of spotlights. It was the most expensive vehicle in the building, a masterpiece of carbon fiber and predatory intent that had been intended for a foreign billionaire. The keys, Gia said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an absolute command. The showroom manager, trembling so violently he nearly tripped over his own feet, scurried forward. He held out the leather-bound key fob, as if offering a heart to a dark god. Gia took them without a word and handed them to Danielle. You've spent enough time in the passenger seat of other people's lives, Gia whispered into her ear, his breath warm against the chill that still lingered in her bones. Drive us home, Danielle. Drive us into our future. Danielle felt the cool weight of the key in her palm. She looked at the car, then back at the wreckage of the showroom, the shattered gold ornaments, the torn fabric of her past, and the man who had tried to convince her she was nothing. For the first time, she didn't feel the phantom ache of her bruises or the sting of old insults. She felt a tectonic shift in her own soul. The weight she felt wasn't the burden of trauma. It was the heavy, solid gravity of her own power. She walked to the driver's side, her royal blue dress flowing behind her like a banner of victory. As the butterfly doors swung open with a hiss of precision engineering, she slid into the cockpit. Gia settled into the seat beside her, his presence a silent anchor of strength. The engine roared to life, a guttural, terrifying growl that shook the glass walls and drowned out the sound of William's distant, pathetic weeping. Danielle gripped the steering wheel, her jade ring catching the light. She shifted into gear and pressed the accelerator, the car surging forward with a smooth, unstoppable force. As they burst through the wide doors and onto the streets of Seoul, the cold winter air whipped past, but Danielle didn't feel the chill. She looked in the rearview mirror one last time, watching the showroom shrink into a dot before vanishing entirely. The city lights began to blur into streaks of neon gold and silver, a glittering kingdom that finally felt like it belonged to her. Beside her, Jia reached over, his tattooed fingers interlacing with hers on the center console. He didn't need to ask if she was okay. He could see it in the set of her shoulders and the steady, unbreakable light in her eyes. Danielle Monroe Beck was no longer a woman defined by what she had lost. She was a phoenix who had burned her old world to the ground to build something far more beautiful. The ride home was fast, silent, and filled with the absolute certainty that from this moment on, no one would ever dare to make her feel small again. She was the wife of the dragon, a queen in her own right, and she was finally, truly, free. The most vital lesson this story teaches us is that your value is inherent and cannot be defined by those who failed to cherish you. William saw Danielle as nothing because he was looking through the lens of his own greed and insecurity. He mistook her kindness for weakness and her silence for defeat. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more Afro-Korean romance stories, and comment below telling me what you thought about Danielle and Jia love story. What should our next story be about? Should we do more mafia romance, forbidden love? Let me know in the comments. And to everyone celebrating, I wish you a beautiful holiday season filled with love and joy. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of love to heal all wounds. See you in the next video.